I met John in 1956, the week we both joined the IBM company. He and I had just finished PhDs, he at Duke and I at Harvard. Matter of fact, I got my degree on Thursday. Nancy and I got married on Saturday, and after a short honeymoon, we went to the IBM laboratory in Poughkeepsie where we joined the Stretch project. Steve Dunwell had recruited each of us, and Nancy was a physicist and circuit analyst. I was a computer architect, and John was a computer architect. So we all met in the group of about 40 people that joined the 40-person project that summer. Well, adding 40 people to 40 people creates massive project indigestion, and so they left us in one big bullpen in a training exercise while we learned to program the 704 computer, and the management tried to figure out who was going to do what. So that was an interesting summer. Well, Steve Dunwell came around to various universities that had computer science programs, whatever they were called, and explained to us that he was undertaking to build a machine 100 times faster than the 704, would be the world's fastest machine, and all of those who were crazy about computers found that an almost irresistible challenge. And so Nancy and I joined the project for a chance to work on the world's fastest computer. Yes, that was 6 to 8 months later. Now, John, my first reaction on meeting John was how fine to have another North Carolinian here in this enterprise. And John is quintessentially a North Carolinian and a gentleman. And to have a Duke person, because I was a Duke undergraduate. So one of the things that I like very much about John is here was another North Carolinian, another Dukey on the project. I had done my undergraduate work at Duke, and John is quintessentially a North Carolinian and a gentleman. I see no real difference in John's personality now from what it was in 1956. John has always been a person of immense excitement, immense courtesy, an interesting person to talk to, and a person who is interested in everything. And he always was. He still is.
Do you remember any stories that might show that from the days when you were office mates together?
Well, sharing an office with John, as I did in the 1957 period, is an exciting experience. We had 2 desks in the office, but it was essentially a one-man office because I was in it in the daytime and he was in it at night. And I'd come in and find the blackboard all covered with new inventions. We would overlap a little bit. And of course, John and I have, among other things in common, that we're crazy about computers. And so it's fun, always fun to talk to John because of his excitement over computers. In the Stretch project, we had a chance to build a machine for speed without worrying about cost. And this drove us to attempt things nobody had ever attempted before, and that was exciting. And that led to John and Harwood's development of the instruction box, execution box concept of pipelining of instructions. Dura Sweeney and I worked on the interruption system. Dura Sweeney and John and several others worked on the floating point, trying to do floating point better than it had been done before. Jim Pomerine and others worked on new multiplication, and Owen McSorley worked on new multiplication and division algorithms. The whole notion that you could really use circuits to get speed, what can you do with that, was very exciting. Werner Buchholz and Jerry Blau and I worked on the character processing part of the Stretch computer and on the indexing facilities, and just having the freedom, together with the opportunity to collaborate with real users who had challenging problems. We were working with Los Alamos Laboratory and going back and forth there every couple of months, working with the National Security Agency in Washington and going back and forth there. Each of these had problems that needed all the computer power that could be brought to bear, and At Los Alamos in particular, the scientists spent 50% of their computer time on 7 problems. It was a new concept to me for a program to have a proprietor who'd lived with that same program for years, knew it backward and forward, had been developing it and refining it, enlarging it, making it faster, and who understood the application in depth and could explain to the computer architects what was really important in his program and how much difference it would make in the speed of doing that calculation. So those were the closeness of the collaboration with users, the freedom from limitations on how much power we could bring to bear, led us to explore many, many ideas that had never been explored before, including protection, supervisory programming, real-time capabilities, long precision floating point, very powerful character operations, the 8-bit byte and lowercase characters, just many, many innovations in the Stretch project. Steve Dunwell raised our sights and tried to make us see that we were designing a high-performance machine for general applicability. And the fact that the National Security Agency application was character-oriented and the Los Alamos one was floating-point oriented made us look over the whole scope of computer applications. It was a mind-stretching experience in every way and a first-class team to stretch your mind with. Well, Stretch was a very exciting project, and yes, we worked a lot of hours day and evening to get things done. Of course, my relationships were principally within the architecture group and the product planning group, and we worked together as a very intimate team. There were 10 or 12 people in the 2 groups put together, and so that our daily working relationships were fundamentally deciding what the machine ought to be. Meanwhile, Eric Block had a whole engineering team, and then there was a whole technology team determining what you make it out of, and then the implementation designs, the multiplication division algorithms, the data flow, and all of those. But we didn't have very much daily association with that except feedback as to what was easy and what was hard. The visual image that comes to me when I think of John as a technical colleague is a person running through a forest with flint and steel, striking sparks in all directions. And over the years, the company has had the wisdom to have some different people come along behind and pick choice sparks and blow on them and fan them into products. In many cases, John has followed the idea all the way through into feasibility demonstration, as he did with Harwood on the pipelining in Stretch, on the RISC concept, on the compiler work, many others. In many other cases, he just talks to the group concerned, gives them the hot idea, and they take it and go with it. So John's influence has been essentially incendiary, not only in the research division, but he's peripatetic in visiting the product development laboratories and stimulates that kind of fire setting in the product development laboratories as well. Because he's not parochial inside the company at all, but knows people all over the industry and has conversations with them, he comes in all the time saying, so-and-so has such and such a new piece of technology. Here's what we might be able to do with it. And so he's a bringer of ideas from the outside world, as well as a generator and stimulator of ideas to people all over the company. That's the essence of John's style to me, and the importance of his contribution. I think it may have been a blessing that John worked chiefly at night and I worked chiefly in the daytime when we shared an office, because otherwise we would have spent all our time in technical conversation. When John has a hot idea, it's going to be discussed with you at some length. And I reckon my most frequent memory is walking with John to the parking lot, getting in my car, having John leaning inside the window, and still going on about the idea of the moment as I'm busy heading off for supper and kids. Well, it's not infrequent to get an evening call or even a late night call from John with a technical idea that needs some protracted discussion. And so the phone rings and you pick it up. hello, this is John. And then so-and-so has a, John occasionally will start, I've had a new idea, but he most often starts with so-and-so has a problem, or so-and-so has a project, or so-and-so has a piece of technology, and then John's idea gets wrapped around what you can do with that. Right? John's a very modest man. I think one of the things that makes John endearing is that he's a person whose focus is completely outside himself. He's passionate about computers, he's very caring about people, and he just isn't concerned with himself or his position or his reputation or any of that at all. He has an almost childlike unawareness of himself, which shows in his dress, in his cigarettes, in his general demeanor. John is just other-focused, and that makes him lovable. John is a very effective listener, and that's why he brings so many ideas from elsewhere. He's 100% comprehender. You don't have to say anything twice to him. And matter of fact, a lot of times you don't have to say something once. All you have to say it is about 50%, and then he's got it. The rest of it is constructed. And this means that in a group meeting, he's an efficient participant, but he's impatient with redundancy. And that's not hard to be. But John's a very effective person to have in a meeting. His most powerful effect, though, is on one-on-one conversations. I would say John's greatest character strength is this business of being unself-conscious, outside himself. I would say his greatest technical strength is just a fierce imagination that makes him see new things where none of the rest of us saw the new things, new possibilities. He also is able to track very complicated logical situations through and understand all the ramifications. It's a high-speed mind.
In your mind,
One of the things you don't even have on your list is the Yorktown simulation engine.
tell me about it.
Well, I don't know much about it. Somebody who's been in research.
Start me enough so that when I see the tape, I'll go ask someone
All right.
else.
Long after I left the company, which is why I don't know much about it directly, John came up with the notion, a special purpose computer for doing logic simulation that used addressing essentially as the means of connection, and designed what is called the Yorktown simulation engine. And since then, several copies and a smaller thing called the Yvette. I think that was called Eve at one point, and then the Yvette now all around the company. The first Yorktown simulation engine could do logic gate level simulation of essentially the IBM 650 at a faster speed than the 650 itself could run and get answers. Now, of course, there's a tremendous change in technology between the vacuum tube diode 650 and the circuitry of the Yorktown simulation engine, but you need to get somebody to talk to you about that. That was a major contribution in the company's ability to debug hardware before it was built. And as we moved into integrated circuits, and the turnaround time of making a new chip radically changed the way one does computer engineering. Having this potent simulation ability was a very strong competitive advantage for the company.
So,
I classify John as a computer scientist. His first contributions and his most important contributions have been as a computer architect, but like all good computer architects, he is concerned with not only the hardware but the software, the whole system behavior. And I think more than any other computer architect, he brings mastery of the hardware all the way down to the circuit level, and the software all the way up to the programming language user interface level. John's most important contribution has been the RISC concept, in my view, and I think no one else alive could have come up with that idea, because it required, on the one hand, an understanding of the very essence of computer implementation, where the time goes in the inner loop of instruction, decoding, and execution. The RISC concept brings with it its own hazards, the most important of which is the magnification of the instruction stream to lots more instructions. John, because of his deep understanding and contributions to optimizing compilers, said the appearance of the optimizing compiler makes it possible for us to go essentially backward in computer design, back to the days of the most primitive computers with the RISC concept. Because the optimizing compiler can take out the excess instructions. The other key technological prerequisite to the RISC concept was the instruction cache, so that the instruction flow, even though amplified, would not have to be refetched from memory. And so John recognized the coming together of optimizing compiler technology, instruction and data caching, and the possibility then to go back to away from microprogrammed computers, back to essentially user microprogrammed computers, or really compiling directly to microcode as a way of getting maximum computer speed. And that's a fundamental intellectual contribution, and I believe no one else could have brought to bear the different component technologies necessary to make it. I think Ralph Gomory was one of the first to recognize the dynamite importance of the RISC computer concept. And he fought very hard in the company to try to get, in the first place, to get it built in research, and the second place, to get it brought into the company product line. A process that involved overcoming a great deal of inertia on the part of engineers, marketers, software people. Ralph held a faith through many long years of uphill struggle, and I think that this is another one of those cases where John starts the fire and somebody else recognizes its importance and nurtures and helps in the political and politico-technical battles necessary to get it all the way to producthood. And I consider that product the white hope of the company at this point in time. Well, in the Mythical Man-Month, I argue very strongly that a key difference in technical management is the importance of harnessing and utilizing the technical genius in a non-managerial capacity. I think one of the strengths of IBM is the dual ladder, and the fact that a person such as John can be recognized for his tremendous contributions as a solo technical person without ever managing a team. That's a real strength of the company. I like to tell the story of Steinmetz and the very unconventional arrangements GE set up, by which a young electrical engineer was assigned each year to live with Steinmetz and buy the groceries and get the laundry done and see that his life got tended to. And I end that story with the punchline that there are two geniuses in that story, and we don't know the name of but one of them. Somebody fought an organizational structure to set up some very unconventional arrangements. The same thing has happened to John within IBM. People have recognized the talent and built the organization around using the talent. And I think that's absolutely crucial. I argue very strongly for that in the Mythical Man-Month as key to great technical management. You just can't draw boxes and then put people in them. You start with people and you draw boxes. One day here in Chapel Hill, I needed to get up with John to talk to him about a situation with him. And so I asked my secretary, Lib Moore, I said, see if you can get John Cocke on the phone. So Lib tried his office, and they thought he was at home, and so she called his mother's house in Charlotte, and the butler answered the phone and says, no ma'am, said, Mr. John isn't here. Said, he's always in the air somewhere. And I think that's an accurate characterization. John moves about to where ideas are and where people who need ideas are. One of my favorite John Cocke stories that tells a whole lot about the person is that in the first year we were working there in the 701 building, Nancy my wife happened to go in John's office, and she's a bird watcher and a bird lover, and she saw on the wall a beautiful bird print that John had. And he said yes, his mother had had that framed and given it to him for Christmas, and Nancy's very innocent, and she admired it. And they all went to lunch, and when she got back from lunch, she found on her desk the beautiful bird print, which John had decided that she really appreciated and needed to have, and so no amount of protestations and explanations would cause John to take it back, and so it hangs today proudly in our living room as one of our mementos of the kind of person that John Cocke is.
Yeah.
One of my favorite stories tells us a lot about John as the person. In the first year when we were working for IBM, one day my wife Nancy went into his office and saw there a beautiful print of a red-shouldered hawk that on his office wall. So she admired it, and John said yes, his mother had had that framed and had given it to him for Christmas. And then we all went to lunch together. When she got back to her office after lunch, she found the print on her desk. John had decided that if she's a bird admirer and bird lover, that she ought to have the red-shouldered hawk, and no amount of protestation or persuasion could get him to take it back. So today it hangs in our living room as a remembrance of the kind of fine, giving person that John is. I went to see John in the Duke Hospital the day after, 2 days after his operation. And there he was, fresh moved out of intensive care into a room where he could have visitors. And characteristically, his conversation was preoccupied with computers, the R6000, how it was going, what it was going to be able to do, and how important it was for us to get one at Chapel Hill. I was immensely gratified both at his healthy color and at the fact that it was the same old John, and the operation had made him, if anything, even more interested in what was going on in the computer business than before. I went to see John in the hospital 2 days after his heart bypass operation and was immensely gratified to see both his healthy color and his fact that the conversation was preoccupied with computers. So I knew John was his old self. If anything, the extra flow of blood had made him more talkative about computers than before. We get a good chance to see John from time to time because he's here for the DUPAC exercise program. Nancy and I get to see John and now Annie from time to time because John's regularly here at the Duke Medical Center as part of his rehabilitation program. Okay, another reason we get to see John is he has always been very much interested in Duke University, and particularly the College of Engineering. So he's down regularly for meetings of their advisory board, and he'll call up and say, I'm going to be in town, or I am in town, and if we can get together, we do. John, you and I have watched the IBM company grow from a small, aggressive, hard-fighting enterprise to a much larger, much more rigid enterprise. And all through that, we've seen really first-class people being hired, and the people have always been the strength of IBM. Do you think the size and the organizational complexity of the company is placing it at a competitive disadvantage? What do you see as the future of the company?